Sometimes the heart sees what the eyes miss, and wisdom chooses what others overlook. In a world where worth is measured by appearances, one warrior's choice would teach an entire hall the true meaning of value. At Vestfjord's great hall, Viking clans gather for marriage alliances. Grettar the Silent, a feared giant warrior, must choose a bride from the Jarl's 3 daughters. Everyone expects him to pick Astrid, the youngest and most beautiful. Instead, he points to Yrsa, the eldest, strong, quiet, and dismissed by other suitors. The hall goes silent. When asked why, Grettar says simply, "She looked me in the eye. The others looked at my scars." His words hang in the smoky air. What deeper truth lies behind this unexpected choice that would change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to Vestfjord's wooden ramparts like memories of old battles, and Jarl Magnus stood at his great hall's entrance, watching the last ships arrive through the grey dawn. For 3 days, longboats had been pulling into his harbour, carved dragon heads cutting through dark waters, bearing the banners of clans whose names were sung in halls from Norway to Iceland. Today would seal alliances that had been forged in blood and tested by winter's harsh judgment. Magnus ran his weathered fingers along the intricate carvings of his doorframe, each groove telling stories of his ancestors. The wood itself was sacred, taken from the first tree his great-grandfather had felled when claiming this land. Today, that legacy would either strengthen or crumble, depending on the marriages arranged within these walls. His 3 daughters represented more than family bonds. They were living treaties, bridges across the treacherous waters of clan politics. Astrid, barely 18, possessed the kind of beauty that could launch ships or end feuds. Her golden hair caught sunlight like spun treasure, and her laugh could soften the hardest warrior's heart. Sigrid, the middle daughter, sharp-witted and silver-tongued, could negotiate trade routes in 3 languages and read the weather better than most seasoned sailors. Then there was Yrsa, his eldest at 26, broad-shouldered and strong-armed, from years working alongside the household thralls, helping with harvests, mending nets, and learning the practical wisdom that kept a settlement alive through brutal winters. Where Astrid drew stares, Yrsa earned respect. Where Sigrid commanded attention, Yrsa offered steady counsel. Most suitors overlooked her, seeking trophy wives rather than true partners. Magnus understood their reasoning, but sometimes wondered if they truly grasped what marriage meant in their harsh northern world. Beauty faded with childbirth and age, but strength endured. Cleverness could navigate one crisis, but wisdom weathered a lifetime of storms. Yrsa possessed something rarer than either the ability to see clearly without judgment, to act without hesitation when duty called. The sound of heavy boots on wooden planks drew his attention. Across the courtyard, a figure approached that made even Magnus pause. Grettar Ironside, called the Silent, moved with the measured gait of a man who had never hurried toward anything, including death. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, his frame filled doorways and his presence emptied rooms of idle chatter. Scars mapped his arms and face like a cartographer's, careful notations, each mark telling of battles survived, enemies defeated, honor maintained. Behind Grettar walked his small retinue, warriors who had earned their places through deed rather than birth. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence of men who had faced the worst humanity could offer and emerged unbroken. Unlike other visiting parties that arrived with fanfare and boasting, Grettar's men moved like wolves, alert, efficient, deadly when necessary. Magnus had fought alongside Grettar during the Orkney campaigns 15 years prior. Even then, the younger warrior's reputation preceded him like storm clouds. Villages surrendered at the mere sight of his ships. Enemy Jarls offered tribute rather than face him in combat. Yet Magnus remembered something else about those brutal months. Grettar's treatment of prisoners, his protection of non-combatants, his refusal to allow rape or unnecessary slaughter among his men. Jarl Magnus. Grettar's voice carried the weight of distant thunder. He offered a slight nod, neither subservient nor challenging. Respect between equals. Grettar Ironside. Your arrival honors my hall. Magnus clasped the giant's forearm, feeling the iron strength beneath scarred skin. Your men are welcome at my hearth. We come seeking alliance through marriage, as discussed. Direct as always, Grettar wasted few words on pleasantries. Magnus gestured toward the great hall, where smoke already rose from cooking fires and servants prepared for the evening's feast. My daughters await your consideration. Each brings different gifts to a union. They walk together through the bustling courtyard, past blacksmiths sharpening weapons, women weaving at outdoor looms, and children playing games that mimicked the warfare their fathers knew too well. Grettar observed everything with the methodical attention of a military commander, noting defensive positions, escape routes, potential advantages, old habits from a lifetime of careful survival. Tell me about them, Grettar said as they approached the hall's entrance. Magnus chose his words carefully. Political marriages required honest assessment, not fatherly pride. Astrid is 18, beautiful beyond measure. She would grace any Jarl's high table and bear you sons that inherit her beauty. Her presence alone could prevent conflicts men hesitate to attack those they find beautiful. Grettar's scarred face remained impassive. And the second? Sigrid, 22, sharp as any blade, quick with numbers and languages. She could manage your trade routes, negotiate with foreign merchants, expand your wealth beyond simple raiding. Her mind works like yours strategically, always thinking 3 moves ahead. They paused at the threshold. Inside, Magnus could see his daughters arranging flowers and overseeing final preparations. Each wore their finest gown, hair braided with silver threads, presenting themselves as worthy brides for such an honored guest. The eldest? Magnus felt pride warm his chest. Yrsa, 26, strong enough to work beside any warrior, wise enough to counsel any Jarl. She has never married. Most men seek ornamental wives rather than true partners. But she could run your household, defend your lands in your absence, and raise children who understand both strength and compassion. For the first time, Grettar's expression shifted slightly. Something almost like interest flickered behind his grey eyes. She has refused other suitors? Some. Others never asked. They see her strength as unfeminine, her age as disadvantage. They prefer wives who need protection rather than offer it. Grettar nodded slowly. Fools often choose poorly. They entered the hall together, and conversation gradually quieted as other guests recognized the legendary warrior. The space itself told stories, carved pillars depicting heroic deeds, banners displaying clan symbols, tables arranged to honor both hierarchy and diplomacy. At the high table, Magnus's daughters waited with practiced poise. Astrid smiled radiantly, her beauty indeed striking even in the smoky hall light. Sigrid offered a respectful nod, her intelligent eyes already assessing this potential husband's worth and character. Yrsa stood calmly, her hands folded, watching Grettar with neither fear nor calculated charm, simply honest curiosity about the man whose reputation had preceded him across the northern seas. As the evening progressed, Magnus watched Grettar observe his daughters during the feast. The giant warrior spoke little, but missed nothing. When Astrid laughed at a jest, when Sigrid corrected a trader's faulty arithmetic, when Yrsa quietly ensured every guest's cup remained filled, he studied not just their beauty or accomplishments, but their character revealed through small actions. The hall filled with music, storytelling, and the kind of revelry that bound clans together through shared joy. Warriors boasted of past glories, skalds recited epic poems, and young couples danced around the central fire. Through it all, Grettar remained a still point of observation, his weathered axe resting against his chair, a weapon that had ended more lives than most men could count. yet somehow represented protection rather than threat in this peaceful setting. Magnus understood that tomorrow would bring decision time, marriage negotiations among their exempt. People were serious business, requiring careful consideration of lineage, politics, and personal compatibility. But tonight, in the warm glow of fire and fellowship, he allowed himself to hope that his daughters would find not just political alliance, but genuine partnership in whatever choice emerged from these ancient rituals of courtship and diplomacy. Dawn broke grey and solemn over Vestfjord, the kind of morning that seemed to hold its breath for momentous events. The great hall had been cleared of the previous night's revelry, transformed into a formal space for ceremonies that would bind clans together across generations. Fresh rushes covered the floor, and the carved pillars gleamed with newly applied oil that made the ancestral stories seem to move in the flickering torchlight. Grettar stood before the ceremonial marriage stone, a massive granite block that had witnessed countless unions since Magnus's great-grandfather first claimed this land. The stone bore ancient runes carved by forgotten hands, symbols that spoke of oaths sworn before gods and men, promises that carried the weight of honor itself. Today, that stone would witness a choice that would echo through the halls of memory. Magnus's daughters waited in their finest attire, each representing a different path forward for clan alliances. Astrid wore deep blue silk that complemented her golden hair, silver brooches catching the light like fallen stars. Her beauty seemed almost ethereal in the morning shadows, the kind of radiance that poets celebrated in epic verses. Beside her, Sigrid stood tall in emerald wool, her sharp eyes bright with intelligence, fingers adorned with rings that spoke of trade connections across distant lands. And Yrsa wore simple brown wool, well cut but practical, her only ornament a silver arm ring passed down from her grandmother, a piece that spoke of family legacy rather than personal vanity. The assembled clans filled every available space, their representatives understanding that this moment would reshape political alliances across the northern territories. Whispered conversations carried speculation about Grettar's choice. Most assumed the legendary warrior would select Astrid. Beauty had its own power in their world, and such a union would be celebrated in songs for generations. A few suggested Sigrid, recognizing that Grettar's expanding territories would benefit from her commercial acumen. None seriously considered Yrsa. At 26, she had already passed what most considered prime marriage age. Her practical nature, while admirable, seemed poorly suited to a warrior whose reputation demanded a wife who enhanced his legendary status. The hall's collective assumption felt almost palpable. This choice seemed predetermined by convention and expectation. Grettar moved slowly toward the three sisters, his massive frame commanding absolute attention. Every step resonated through the wooden floor like thunder announcing a storm's approach. His scarred hands, which had wielded weapons in countless battles, hung empty at his sides, yet somehow his presence filled the space more completely than any drawn blade could have managed. Magnus stepped forward, his voice carrying the formal tones required for such momentous occasions. "Grettar Ironside, you have observed my daughters and found them worthy of consideration. Each brings gifts that could strengthen the bond between our clans. Which among them would you choose as wife?" The question hung in the smoky air like an incantation. Every person in the hall leaned forward slightly, unwilling to miss even the smallest gesture that might reveal the giant warrior's decision. Astrid's smile remained radiant, but her hands clasped tightly before her, betraying nervousness beneath her composed exterior. Sigrid's intelligent eyes never left Grettar's face, studying him as she might analyze a complex trade negotiation. Yrsa simply waited, her expression neither hopeful nor resigned, but calmly accepting whatever fate the morning would bring. For a long moment, Grettar said nothing. His grey eyes that had seen the worst of warfare and the best of human courage, moved slowly across the three sisters. When his gaze fell on Astrid, she straightened slightly, her beauty seeming to intensify under his attention. When he looked at Sigrid, she lifted her chin with quiet confidence, ready to discuss whatever practical arrangements such a marriage might require. When Grettar's eyes met Yrsa's, something shifted in the hall's atmosphere. Where Astrid had offered radiant charm, and Sigrid had displayed sharp intelligence, Yrsa simply looked back at him, not studying his scars with curious fascination like so many others, not calculating his worth as a potential husband, not trying to project an image of herself that might please him. She simply saw him as he was, a man making a difficult choice, and offered the respect of honest attention. "I choose," Grettar's voice filled the hall, then paused. His weathered finger rose slowly, and every eye followed its direction. Past Astrid, whose breath caught in sudden uncertainty, past Sigrid, whose sharp mind was already calculating what this unexpected development might mean. The finger pointed directly at Yrsa, who accepted his selection with the same calm dignity she had shown throughout the entire process. The hall erupted in surprised murmurs that quickly died as Grettar raised his hand for silence. Magnus, though pleased by the choice, understood that explanation was required. Political marriages demanded clear reasoning that all parties could understand and accept. "Your choice honors my daughter," Magnus said carefully, "but the clans gathered here would benefit from understanding your reasoning. Astrid's beauty could prevent wars through admiration. Sigrid's intellect could expand trade and wealth. What gifts do you see in Yrsa that led to this decision?" Grettar was quiet for another moment, gathering words that had never come easily to him. When he spoke, his voice carried across the hall with the clarity of absolute conviction. "Last night, when I entered your hall, each of your daughters looked at me differently." His scarred hands gestured slightly, emphasizing the importance of his observation. "Astrid saw my reputation and smiled to charm the famous warrior. Sigrid saw my wealth and territories and calculated the advantages of alliance." The hall remained completely silent, every person straining to hear words that would enter clan legend. But Yrsa, Grettar's voice softened slightly, carrying a warmth that few had ever heard from the legendary fighter. "Yrsa looked me in the eye. The others looked at my scars. The words landed like hammer blows on the ceremonial anvil. In that simple observation lay a truth that cut deeper than any political calculation or social convention. Yrsa had seen past the fearsome reputation, past the wealth and power, past even the disfiguring marks left by countless battles. She had looked at the man himself and offered the rarest gift in their harsh world, recognition without judgment. Magnus felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In all his careful planning for advantageous marriages, he had never considered that his eldest daughter's greatest asset was not her strength or wisdom, but her ability to see clearly and honestly. Grettar, the most feared warrior in the northern seas, had recognized something that lesser men had missed entirely. Yrsa stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "If you would have me as wife, Grettar Ironside, I accept with honor. No flowery speeches about love or destiny, no dramatic declarations of eternal devotion. Just honest acceptance between two people who understood that marriage in their world was built on respect, partnership, and the courage to face life's challenges together." The hall exploded in genuine celebration this time, the kind of joy that comes when people witness something unexpectedly meaningful. What had begun as a political transaction had revealed itself as something far more precious, a union based on true recognition between kindred spirits who valued substance over surface, character over convention. As the ceremonies continued and formal oaths were sworn before gods and clans, Magnus watched his daughter stand beside her chosen husband and realized that perhaps the best alliances were not those calculated by politics, but those forged by the deeper wisdom of hearts that recognized their true matches across crowded halls and social expectations. The days following the marriage ceremony brought unexpected challenges that tested both Grettar's resolve and Yrsa's quiet strength. Word of the giant warrior's unconventional choice spread through Vestfjord like ripples from a stone cast into still water, reaching every corner of the settlement and beyond. Yrsa's silver marriage bracelet, a thick band of intricately woven metal that Grettar had presented during the formal exchange of gifts, caught the morning light as she worked alongside the household women. Unlike the ornate jewelry worn by typical Jarl's wives, this bracelet bore practical engravings of protective runes rather than decorative flourishes. It spoke of a union built on substance rather than display, yet its very simplicity seemed to draw more attention than the most elaborate golden ornaments. "The other clans are talking," whispered Solveig, one of Magnus's trusted servants, as she helped Yrsa prepare the morning meal. Her weathered hands worked efficiently at kneading bread, but her eyes darted nervously around the kitchen. "Some say Grettar chose poorly, that he should have taken Astrid for alliance strength." Yrsa continued her work without pause, measuring grain for the day's porridge with the same steady concentration she brought to every task. Let them talk. Words change nothing that has been sworn before the gods. But privately she felt the weight of those whispered conversations. Marriage in their world carried expectations beyond personal happiness. It represented clan honor, political wisdom, strategic thinking. Her union with Grettar would be judged not just on their personal compatibility, but on how effectively it served both families' interests. The pressure was immense, yet she had always thrived under responsibility rather than crumbled beneath it. Grettar faced his own complications as he met with Magnus and visiting Jarls to finalize trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. The men respected his military prowess without question, but some seemed puzzled by his matrimonial choice. Their confusion manifested in carefully worded comments that danced around direct criticism while expressing doubt about his judgment. "Your bride seems practical," offered Jarl of the eastern settlements, his tone suggesting that practicality in a wife was somehow disappointing for a man of Grettar's legendary status. Though perhaps beauty fades faster than usefulness in these harsh lands, Grettar's grey eyes fixed on the speaker with the kind of steady attention that had preceded violence in less diplomatic circumstances. "My wife possesses qualities that matter more than fleeting appearance. Any man who cannot recognize true worth reveals his own limitations, not hers." The exchange created an uncomfortable silence around the planning table. Other Jarls exchanged glances, recognizing that Grettar's defense of his choice carried an implicit challenge to anyone who questioned it further. Yet the underlying tension remained. Political marriages were community affairs, and the community's confidence mattered for long-term success. Magnus watched these interactions with growing concern. His daughter's happiness mattered to him deeply, but so did the stability of alliances that kept his people safe through brutal winters and potential conflicts. If other clans began viewing this marriage as a sign of poor judgment from Grettar, it could undermine the very partnerships they had gathered to strengthen. "Perhaps we should discuss specific trade routes," Magnus suggested diplomatically, steering conversation towards safer territory. "Grettar's northern territories offer access to amber and furs that could benefit all our settlements." As the men debated commercial arrangements, Yrsa dealt with more personal challenges. Astrid, though gracious in public, struggled privately with the unexpected outcome. She had prepared for marriage to a legendary warrior her entire life, assuming that her beauty would naturally attract the most prestigious matches available. The reversal of expectations left her questioning not just the decision, but her own understanding of what men truly valued. "I don't understand," Astrid confided to Sigrid as they walked through Magnus's gardens. "Mother always said that beauty was a woman's greatest asset, that it could open any door and win any heart. But Grettar looked right past me as if I were invisible." Sigrid, whose sharp mind had already begun analyzing the situation from multiple angles, offered what comfort she could. "Perhaps he sees marriage differently than other men. His life has been shaped by warfare and survival. Maybe he needs a partner who complements those experiences rather than simply decorates them." "But I could learn those things," Astrid protested, her voice carrying genuine pain. "I could be whatever he needed me to be. Why didn't he give me that chance?" The question hung between them, touching on deeper issues of identity and self-worth. In their society, unmarried women of noble birth faced uncertain futures, dependent on family protection and limited in their ability to shape their own destinies. Astrid's beauty had always seemed like guaranteed security until it suddenly wasn't. Meanwhile, Grettar and Yrsa began the delicate process of learning each other's rhythms and expectations. Their conversations, conducted during evening walks around Magnus's settlement, revealed shared perspectives on duty, honor, and the practical challenges of leadership in their unforgiving world. "Your father's lands are well managed," Grettar observed as they passed fields where workers prepared for autumn harvest. His trained eye noted defensive positions, resource distribution, and the general prosperity that spoke of wise governance. "But the northern borders worry me. Too much territory with too few defenders." Yrsa nodded thoughtfully. "Father has always preferred diplomacy to fortification. He believes that strong alliances provide better protection than high walls. Your marriage to me represents part of that strategy. And you? What do you believe?" She considered the question seriously, appreciating that he sought her opinion rather than simply expecting agreement. "Both have merit. Walls protect against raiders, but alliances prevent wars entirely. The challenge is knowing which approach fits each situation." Their compatibility extended beyond political philosophy to practical partnership. When Grettar's men required additional provisions for their extended stay, Yrsa coordinated supply arrangements without needing detailed instructions. When disputes arose between visiting warriors from different clans, she helped mediate solutions that preserved honor while preventing escalation. Her ability to handle complex situations calmly impressed not just her new husband, but his battle-hardened followers, who had rarely seen such competence in domestic leadership. Yet underneath these positive developments lay persistent undercurrents of doubt from the wider community. Servants whispered about whether the marriage would produce strong children. Visiting traders speculated about how Grettar's choice might affect his fearsome reputation. Young warriors wondered if such an unconventional decision indicated some hidden weakness in the legendary fighter. The silver marriage bracelet that Yrsa wore became a symbol of these swirling tensions. Some saw it as evidence of a practical union that prioritized substance over show. Others viewed it as proof that Grettar had settled for less than he deserved. The bracelet itself remained constant, beautiful in its simplicity, strong in its construction, meaningful in its protective runes, but the interpretations placed upon it shifted with each observer's prejudices and expectations. As their first week together drew to a close, both Grettar and Yrsa understood that their marriage faced challenges beyond the typical adjustments of newlywed couples. They had chosen each other based on recognition and respect, but they would need to prove their wisdom to a community that measured success in terms they were still learning to navigate together. The wooden marriage chest that Yrsa brought to her new life bore the carved initials of 3 generations of women from Magnus's line. Each wife had added her own small touches, a hidden compartment here, a protective symbol there, creating a repository of feminine wisdom passed down through decades of northern winters. Now it sat in the dwelling that Grettar's men had constructed for the newlywed couple, its familiar presence offering comfort in unfamiliar surroundings. 2 weeks into their marriage, the first real test of their partnership emerged from an unexpected source. Bjorn Stormhand, a young Jarl from the western settlements, arrived unannounced with a small but aggressive retinue. His reputation preceded him: ambitious, hot-tempered, and resentful of Grettar's legendary status among the northern clans. "I came to see the famous warrior who chooses wives like he chooses battles," Bjorn announced loudly enough for the entire settlement to hear. His words carried the kind of calculated insult designed to provoke confrontation while maintaining plausible deniability. Unconventionally, Grettar received this challenge in the main courtyard, his massive frame relaxed but ready. Years of warfare had taught him to recognize when young men sought reputation by challenging established leaders. Bjorn's visit served multiple purposes, testing Grettar's resolve, undermining his recent marriage choice and potentially creating opportunities for political advancement if the legendary warrior could be goaded into poor decisions. "You honor my hall with your presence," Grettar replied calmly, offering the traditional courtesy expected between Jarls. His voice carried no warmth, but neither did it rise to meet Bjorn's provocative tone. "What brings you so far from your own lands?" Bjorn dismounted with theatrical flourish, his ornate weapons and rich clothing contrasting sharply with Grettar's practical attire. "Curiosity about your recent marriage. The stories spreading through our settlements suggest interesting choices were made here." Yrsa emerged from the dwelling at that moment, carrying a water jug to refill the courtyard well. Her timing was purely coincidental, but it placed her directly in the center of Bjorn's attention and allowed him to continue his carefully orchestrated provocation. "Ah, the bride herself," Bjorn said, his tone carrying just enough mockery to sting without crossing into outright insult. "Tell me, lady, how does it feel to be chosen when others were overlooked? Does victory taste sweeter when it comes unexpectedly?" The question was expertly crafted to wound regardless of how Yrsa responded. If she showed pride, she would seem arrogant. If she displayed humility, she would appear to accept that her selection was indeed surprising. If she remained silent, she would seem unable to defend her position. Bjorn had clearly planned this confrontation carefully. Yrsa set down her water jug with deliberate precision and met Bjorn's gaze directly. "Victory belongs to those who understand what they seek. My husband chose a partner who could stand beside him rather than an ornament to display his wealth. If that choice puzzles you, perhaps you should examine what you value in your own relationships." Her response carried the kind of quiet steel that Grettar had recognized during their first meeting. She had neither risen to the bait nor retreated from the challenge, instead turning the implied criticism back on her questioner in a way that revealed his shallow understanding of partnership. Bjorn's face flushed slightly at being outmaneuvered by someone he had expected to intimidate easily. Bold words from a woman who found marriage only when beauty failed to secure it. The insult crossed lines that even political rivalry should respect. Grettar stepped forward, his movement fluid but unmistakably threatening. "You will apologize to my wife, or you will leave my lands. Choose quickly." The courtyard fell silent, except for the distant sounds of daily work continuing beyond the immediate confrontation. Bjorn's men shifted, nervously, recognizing that their leader had pushed his challenge beyond safe boundaries. Grettar's reputation was built on actions rather than words. When he made statements, he followed through regardless of consequences. Bjorn found himself trapped between backing down publicly, which would damage his reputation, or escalating to violence against a warrior whose skills far exceeded his own. His ambitious nature had led him into a position where all choices carried significant costs. "Perhaps I spoke hastily," he said finally, the words clearly bitter but necessary for his own survival. "Lady Yrsa, I withdraw any offense my words may have caused. It was barely an apology, but it met the minimum requirements of social courtesy." Yrsa inclined her head with dignified acceptance, showing neither triumph nor resentment. Her gracious response to inadequate amends demonstrated the kind of political wisdom that made strong marriages work in their complex society. "Your retinue is welcome to share our evening meal before continuing your journey," she added, offering hospitality that reinforced her position while giving Bjorn an opportunity to withdraw without complete humiliation. As the immediate tension subsided, Magnus appeared from the direction of his own hall. He had obviously heard the commotion and chose his timing carefully, arriving late enough to avoid being drawn into the initial confrontation, but early enough to help manage its resolution. "Jarl Bjorn." "Unexpected but welcome," Magnus said smoothly. "Your father and I fought together in our younger days. How do his holdings prosper?" The conversation shifted to safer territory of family connections and regional news, allowing everyone involved to step back from the confrontation with honor relatively intact. But the underlying message had been delivered and received. Grettar's Marriage choice would not be mocked without consequence, and Yrsa possessed the strength to defend herself when necessary. That evening, as they prepared for sleep in their new dwelling, Yrsa examined her marriage chest more thoughtfully than usual. The carved symbols left by previous generations seemed to offer silent counsel about weathering the storms that tested all partnerships. "You handled Bjorn well," Grettar observed, settling his weapon belt in its customary place beside their bed. Many warriors would have struggled to deflect his provocations so skillfully. "He sought to diminish our marriage by implying I was chosen from desperation rather than recognition," Yrsa replied, running her fingers along the chest's carved lid. "But his words revealed more about his own fears than our reality. Men who cannot see worth beyond surface appearance often worry that others judge by the same shallow standards." Grettar nodded slowly, appreciating both her insight and her refusal to be diminished by deliberate cruelty. "There will be other challenges. My reputation attracts those who seek to build their own standing by tearing down what they cannot achieve. Then we will meet them together," Yrsa said simply, closing the marriage chest with a soft thud that seemed to seal their partnership against whatever external pressures the future might bring. The ivory drinking horn that had belonged to Grettar's father sat prominently on the mantel of their dwelling, its surface carved with intricate scenes of sea voyages and distant conquests. Unlike the practical items that filled their daily life, this artifact spoke of heritage and expectations, the weight of a legendary bloodline that demanded its own form of honor. Tonight, as autumn winds howled outside their walls, both Grettar and Yrsa found themselves contemplating the deeper implications of their union. 3 weeks had passed since Bjorn's challenge, and the settlement had begun settling into new rhythms around the married couple. But beneath the surface calm, more complex issues were emerging that tested their partnership in ways neither had fully anticipated. The challenges came not from external enemies, but from the intimate negotiations required when two independent souls attempted to build a shared life. Yrsa stood before the carved mirror that Grettar's men had brought from his northern holdings, studying her reflection with unusual uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring the first formal feast, where she would serve as hostess alongside her husband, entertaining Jarls and their wives who would judge every aspect of her performance. The responsibility felt heavier than any physical labor she had ever undertaken. "My mother always said that hosting revealed a woman's true character," she murmured, adjusting the silver pins that held her dark hair in elaborate braids. "That guests could sense whether hospitality came from genuine welcome or mere obligation." Grettar looked up from sharpening his CX, a daily ritual that helped him think through complex problems. "Your character has never been in question, but you seem troubled by something deeper than tomorrow's feast." She turned from the mirror to face him directly, appreciation flickering in her eyes at his perceptiveness. "I find myself wondering whether I can be the wife you truly need, not just the one you chose. Your reputation demands certain things, a household that reflects your status, connections that enhance your influence, children who carry forward your legacy. I worry that my practical nature may not serve those requirements adequately." The confession revealed vulnerabilities that Yrsa rarely acknowledged, even to herself. Marriage to a legendary figure carried pressures that extended far beyond personal compatibility. Every choice she made would reflect on Grettar's judgment. Every failure would be seen as evidence that his unconventional selection had been unwise. Grettar set aside his weapon and moved to stand before her, his scarred hands gentle as they framed her face. "Do you know why I never married before?" "Now?" She shook her head, genuinely curious about the reasoning that had kept such an eligible warrior unattached for so many years. "Because every woman who sought my attention wanted to marry my reputation rather than me. They saw the legend of Grettar the Silent, the wealth and status that came with my name, the children who would inherit my holdings. But none of them looked at the man who bears the scars of too many battles, who wakes some nights calling out warnings to warriors who died years ago, who finds more peace in honest work than in recounting old glories." His words carried the weight of long-considered reflection, insights gained through years of observation and solitude. You see me clearly, not just the fearsome warrior, but the man who values quiet competence over dramatic display. That recognition is worth more than any political advantage another marriage might have provided. Yrsa felt some of her anxiety ease, but deeper concerns remained. Yet expectations exist beyond our personal feelings. If I failed to provide the kind of household that enhances your standing among other Jarls, if I cannot bear strong sons to continue your line, if my presence somehow diminishes rather than elevates your reputation, then we will face those challenges as they arise. Together, Grettar interrupted firmly. But understand this, my choice of you was not impulsive or romantic, it was strategic in ways that other men failed to recognize. You possess exactly the qualities that will serve my interests best in the long term. He gestured toward the ivory horn, its carved surface catching firelight from their hearth. My father won that horn in single combat against a berserker who had terrorized coastal settlements for 3 seasons. The victory made him famous, but the horn itself became a burden. Every guest who entered our hall expected to hear that story, to see him relive that moment of glory. His reputation became a cage that trapped him in the past. Yrsa followed his gaze, beginning to understand the deeper point he was making about legacy and expectations. I chose you precisely because you have no interest in keeping me trapped by old glories. Your strength lies in building new foundations rather than polishing old trophies. That perspective will serve our future better than all the political connections that a more conventional marriage might have provided. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Magnus entered at Grettar's invitation, his weathered face showing the kind of paternal concern that had brought him through the wind and cold. I hope I'm not intruding, but there are matters we should discuss before tomorrow's gathering. He settled into the chair they offered, accepting the cup of warm ale that Yrsa provided without being asked. Word has arrived from the eastern settlements. Jarl Eric's eldest son was killed in a hunting accident. The succession may create opportunities for new alliances, but also potential conflicts if multiple claimants emerge. The news shifted their conversation to political realities that would affect all the northern clans. Eric's death created a power vacuum that ambitious men would seek to fill, possibly through warfare, if diplomatic solutions failed to emerge. Such instability demanded careful navigation from established leaders like Grettar, whose reputation and holdings made him both a valuable ally and a potential target. Eric's younger son lacks the strength to hold those lands against determined opposition, Grettar observed, his strategic mind already analyzing the implications. But his daughter married into the Thornwood clan. They might press her claim to keep the territory under friendly control. Magnus nodded grimly. Which is why tomorrow's feast matters more than social courtesy. The relationships we strengthen or weaken, that could determine whether we face another season of raiding or achieve the stability needed for proper preparation for winter. As they discussed various scenarios and potential responses, Yrsa listened carefully while refilling cups and maintaining the fire. Her contributions to the conversation came through thoughtful questions rather than bold pronouncements, but both men increasingly turned to her observations when considering the human factors that influenced political decisions. The ivory horn watched silently from its place of honor, a reminder that every generation faced its own tests of wisdom and courage. The iron ring that Yrsa wore on her right hand had belonged to her grandmother, a simple band worn smooth by decades of hard work and harder decisions. As she prepared for the crucial feast that would test her worthiness as Grettar's wife, she found herself turning the ring unconsciously, drawing strength from the memory of the woman who had taught her that true power lay in quiet competence rather than loud declaration. The great hall buzzed with preparation as servants arranged tables according to strict protocols of honor and hierarchy. Each placement carried meaning: who sat near the high table, who received the choicest cuts of meat, who was served first, and by whom. These details might seem trivial to outsiders, But in their world of clan politics and warrior culture, such gestures could cement alliances or create lasting resentments. Yrsa moved through the preparations with methodical efficiency, her grandmother's ring catching firelight as she directed the placement of silver serving pieces and ensured adequate supplies of mead and ale. Unlike other Jarl's wives who might delegate such tasks entirely to servants, she understood that personal attention to detail communicated respect for guests while preventing the small failures that could undermine larger diplomatic efforts. The Eastern Jarls arrive within the hour, Magnus informed her as he inspected the arrangements with a father's protective concern. Jarl Thorvald brings his sister. She's known for sharp observations about other women's management of their households. Her opinions carry weight among the clan wives. Yrsa nodded calmly. Though she felt the pressure of being judged by standards she was still learning to navigate. Everything is prepared according to your guidance and Grettar's preferences. The meal will honor our guests while demonstrating our household's capability. What she didn't mention was her awareness that this feast represented more than hospitality. It was her public examination as Grettar's chosen wife. Success would validate his unconventional choice and strengthen their position among the clans. Failure would provide ammunition for those who questioned his judgment and undermined their partnership's effectiveness. Grettar appeared in the hall's doorway, resplendent in the kind of formal attire that transformed him from everyday warrior to legendary Jarl. His deep blue tunic bore silver embroidery that caught the light with each movement, while his arm ring spoke of wealth accumulated through successful campaigns across distant seas. Yet his eyes sought Yrsa immediately, offering silent support for the challenges ahead. "You look like a queen," he said simply, and the genuine admiration in his voice steadied her nerves more effectively than any elaborate preparation could have achieved. The guests began arriving as the sun touched the horizon, their procession through Magnus's courtyard, accompanied by the jingling of horse tack and the rustle of expensive fabrics. Yrsa stood beside her husband at the hall's entrance, receiving each party with the gracious formality that their positions demanded. Each greeting required careful attention to rank, relationship, and current political standing, a complex dance of courtesy that could enhance or damage important alliances. Jarl Thorvald proved to be a weathered man whose bearing spoke of battles survived and wisdom earned through hard experience. His sister, the formidable Lady Ingrid, possessed the kind of sharp gaze that missed nothing while revealing little of her own thoughts. When she clasped Yrsa's hand in greeting, her grip was firm and her assessment undisguised. "So you are the woman who captured Grettar's attention when others could not," Ingrid said, her tone neither critical nor approving. "Your reputation for practical wisdom has reached even our distant holdings. I hope tonight's gathering will demonstrate whether that reputation is deserved," Yrsa replied honestly, recognizing that false modesty would serve no purpose with such a direct woman. As the feast progressed, Yrsa found herself navigating conversations that ranged from trade negotiations to marriage prospects for younger clan members. Her role required her to facilitate discussions while remaining alert to undercurrents of tension or opportunity that might require Grettar's attention. The iron ring on her finger seemed to warm with each successful interaction, as if her grandmother's spirit approved of her performance. The evening's crucial moment came when Lady Ingrid rose to offer the traditional toast, honoring the host household. Every word would be remembered and repeated across the northern settlements, making this both recognition and judgment of Yrsa's worthiness as a Jarl's wife. "We honor Jarl Magnus for his generous hospitality and wise governance," Ingrid began, her voice carrying clearly through the smoky hall. "We honor Grettar Ironside for his legendary valor and strategic wisdom, and we honor Lady Yrsa, whose capable hands have made this gathering possible, and whose presence brings credit to both her birth family and her chosen household." The words were carefully chosen to acknowledge Yrsa's competence while affirming the validity of Grettar's choice. Around the hall, other guests raised their drinking horns in agreement, their approval helping to solidify her position among the clan wives whose opinions would shape her future acceptance. But the evening's true test came during a private moment when several of the visiting women gathered around the fire while their husbands discussed military matters. Lady Ingrid addressed Yrsa directly, her question carrying implications that extended far beyond casual conversation. "Tell me, young wife, what advice would you offer to a woman whose husband must choose between personal honor and clan survival? Such decisions test even the strongest marriages." The question was clearly meant to probe Yrsa's understanding of the complex loyalties that governed their world. How, she answered, would reveal whether she possessed the wisdom necessary to counsel a legendary warrior through the difficult choices that leadership demanded. Yrsa turned her grandmother's ring slowly, drawing on generations of feminine wisdom passed down through women who had faced similar challenges. I would remind her that true honor often requires sacrifice, but survival without honor is merely existence. A strong marriage allows both partners to find solutions that preserve what matters most while adapting to circumstances they cannot control. The answer satisfied Lady Ingrid's probing while revealing Yrsa's understanding that marriage to a man like Grettar would require her to help navigate impossible choices between competing values. Her response demonstrated both practical wisdom and philosophical depth, exactly the qualities needed to support a warrior whose decisions affected entire settlements. As the evening drew to a close and guests began preparing for departure, Yrsa felt the weight of successful performance settling around her like a warm cloak. She had proven herself capable of managing the complex social and political requirements that came with her new position. The iron ring on her finger seemed to pulse with ancestral approval, acknowledging that another generation had met the test of leadership with honor intact. The leather-bound ledger that Yrsa discovered hidden beneath loose floorboards in their dwelling storage room bore water stains and careful notations in her father's familiar script. As she lifted the heavy book by flickering candlelight, her hands trembled slightly, not from the weight of parchment and binding, but from the recognition that some secrets carried consequences that could reshape everything she thought she understood about her marriage and her father's political maneuvering. The discovery had come by accident, while searching for additional storage space to accommodate wedding gifts that continued arriving from distant clans. A loose board had shifted under her weight, revealing the carefully concealed compartment that her father had obviously intended to remain hidden. Now, as autumn deepened toward winter's approach, Yrsa found herself holding evidence that would transform her understanding of recent events. The ledger's pages documented years of careful correspondence between Magnus and Grettar, communications that predated their supposed first meeting during the marriage negotiations by nearly 3 years. Letter after letter revealed a gradually developing friendship based on mutual respect and shared concerns about increasing instability among the northern clans. What she had believed to be a spontaneous alliance forged through her unexpected marriage was actually the culmination of long-planned cooperation between two leaders who had recognized each other's worth across the distances that separated their holdings. Her hands moved to the silver marriage bracelet that encircled her wrist, its familiar weight suddenly feeling different as she processed this new information. Had Grettar's choice of her been as spontaneous and personally motivated as he had claimed? Or had it been part of a larger political strategy developed through years of secret planning with her father? The ledger's most recent entries, dated just weeks before Grettar's arrival, contained discussions that made her stomach tighten with uncomfortable possibilities. Magnus had written extensively about his daughter's different qualities, describing each woman's strengths and potential suitability for alliance marriage. His assessment of Yrsa was thorough and accurate, but reading it felt like viewing herself through a merchant's eyes, valuable goods being evaluated for trade rather than a daughter being celebrated for her inherent worth. Yrsa possesses the practical wisdom and steady temperament that would serve Grettar's long-term interests better than beauty or cleverness alone, one passage read. Her acceptance of unmarried status suggests she would welcome a partnership based on respect rather than romantic infatuation. Such marriages often prove more durable than those founded on passion. The words stung despite their accuracy. Had her father been arranging her marriage behind her knowledge while she believed herself too practical and plain to attract such an extraordinary suitor? More disturbing still, had Grettar's moving words about choosing the woman who looked at him rather than his scars been carefully crafted theatre, designed to make her feel specially chosen when she was actually fulfilling a predetermined role? Footsteps on the wooden walkway outside announced Grettar's return from his evening consultation with Magnus about winter preparations. Yrsa quickly replaced the ledger in its hiding place and composed herself, unwilling to confront these revelations without careful consideration of their implications. The silver bracelet seemed to weigh heavier on her wrist as she straightened, its protective runes feeling more like chains than blessings. "You look troubled," Grettar observed as he entered, his perceptive eyes immediately noting the tension she was trying to conceal. "Did something happen during your preparations today?" The direct question forced her to make an immediate choice between honesty and deception. Her natural inclination toward truth warred with uncertainty about how to process what she had discovered. The man before her was either the genuine partner who had chosen her for authentic reasons, or a sophisticated manipulator who had successfully convinced her that calculation was actually recognition. "I found something that raises questions about our marriage," she said carefully, watching his expression for any signs of guilt or defensive preparation. "Documents that suggest our union may have been planned well before your arrival here." Grettar's scarred face remained impassive, but she caught a flicker of something, resignation perhaps, or relief that a difficult secret had finally emerged. He moved to their shared chair by the fire, gesturing for her to join him in the kind of serious conversation that their relationship had been built upon. "Your father and I have been corresponding for several years," he admitted without attempting denial or evasion. "The political situation among the northern clans concerned us both, and we began exploring possibilities for cooperation that could benefit our mutual interests." The confirmation of her suspicions brought unexpected relief mixed with disappointment. At least he was being honest now, even if that honesty revealed uncomfortable truths about the foundations of their partnership. "Did you come here already, knowing you would choose me? Was your reasoning about looking beyond scars simply manipulation designed to make me feel specially selected?" The questions carried all the pain of someone who had believed herself uniquely seen and valued, only to discover that her appeal might have been calculated rather than spontaneous. Grettar's response would determine whether their marriage could survive this revelation with trust intact. "I came here knowing that marriage to one of Magnus's daughters would serve both our clan's interests," Grettar replied slowly, choosing his words with obvious care. "Your father described each of you honestly, including your particular strengths and qualities. But Yrsa," he paused, turning to face her directly. "Knowing about someone and actually meeting them are entirely different experiences." She studied his scarred features, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. The leather ledger's revelations had shaken her confidence in her ability to read people accurately, making her question judgments she had previously trusted without reservation. "When I stood before you and your sisters, everything I said about recognition and scars was absolutely true. Your father's letters had prepared me to respect your practical wisdom, but they could not convey the moment when you looked at me without fear, calculation, or pity. That recognition was real, regardless of whatever political considerations brought me to your father's hall." His explanation offered a middle path between complete deception and total honesty. Their marriage served political purposes while also fulfilling personal needs for both partners. Yet the knowledge that she had been evaluated and selected like trade goods rather than courted as a potential partner left wounds that would require time and trust to heal properly. What other secrets exist between you and my father? What other plans have been made that affect our future without our knowledge or consent? The question revealed her deeper fear that she was merely a player in someone else's strategy rather than an active participant in shaping her own destiny. Marriage, in their society, always involved political considerations, but she had believed that Grettar's unconventional choice represented something more personal and meaningful than typical alliance building. There are discussions about mutual defense agreements and trade arrangements, Grettar admitted, plans that would benefit both our holdings while strengthening the northern clans against potential threats. But Yrsa, understand this, I could have achieved those same political goals through marriage to either of your sisters. My choice of you specifically was based on personal recognition, not strategic calculation. The silver marriage bracelet caught firelight as Yrsa adjusted its position, the gesture unconscious but symbolic of her need to find new comfort in symbols that had suddenly become complicated. The protective runes carved into its surface seemed to mock her with their promise of security based on honest partnership. I need time to understand what this means for us, she said finally. Not just the political arrangements, but whether I can trust my own judgment about what is real between us versus what serves larger purposes that I'm only beginning to comprehend. Grettar nodded, with the kind of patience that spoke of a man who understood that trust, once complicated, required careful rebuilding rather than quick reassurances. The war horn that hung beside the Great Hall's entrance had not sounded in anger. For over a decade, its carved surface worn smooth by generations of hands that had lifted it to call warriors to defense of their lands. Now, as messenger after messenger arrived through the early winter snow, the horn seemed to watch with silent anticipation, waiting for the moment when words would fail, and only the ancient language of bronze and breath could summon the courage needed for survival. 3 days had passed since Yrsa's discovery of the hidden correspondence, 3 days of careful conversations and cautious rebuilding of trust between herself and Grettar. Their relationship had begun settling into a new foundation built on complete honesty rather than romantic idealism, when external events suddenly demanded all their attention and forced them to set aside personal concerns in favor of immediate survival. The first messenger brought news that Jarl Eric's death had indeed triggered the succession crisis that Magnus and Grettar had feared. 2 claimants now pressed for control of the eastern territories. Eric's weak, younger son, supported by established allies who preferred predictable leadership, and his daughter's husband from the Thornwood clan, backed by warriors eager for the opportunities that aggressive expansion could provide. The second messenger, arriving at dawn with frost in his beard and exhaustion in his eyes, carried worse news. The Thornwood forces had not waited for diplomatic resolution of the succession dispute. They had attacked Eric's remaining holdings under cover of the season's first blizzard, overwhelming defenders who had expected negotiations rather than warfare. The conquered territories now served as a base for further expansion, and Magnus's lands lay directly in their path toward the valuable coastal settlements that would complete their control of the entire eastern region. Magnus called an immediate council in the Great Hall, gathering his most trusted advisors around the carved table where so many crucial decisions had been made across the decades. The morning light filtering through high windows cast everything in grey tones that matched the gravity of their situation. War was coming, whether they chose it or not. The only question remaining was whether they could prepare adequately for the storm now bearing down upon them. "How long before they can mount an attack against our borders?" Grettar asked, his strategic mind immediately focused on practical timelines and defensive preparations. His scarred fingers traced routes on the rough map spread across the table's surface, calculating distances and obstacles that might slow an advancing army. 2 weeks, perhaps 3 if the weather worsens, replied Olaf, Magnus's grizzled captain of guards. But they have the advantage of momentum and surprise. Our people are prepared for winter, not warfare. Most of our younger men are away on trading expeditions that were planned during more peaceful times. The reality of their situation settled over the council like a heavy cloak. They faced an aggressive enemy with superior numbers, limited time for preparation, and defending forces scattered across distant ventures. Traditional defensive strategies would likely fail against such overwhelming disadvantages, requiring them to find unconventional approaches to survival. Yrsa entered the hall carrying refreshments for the council, but instead of simply serving and withdrawing, she lingered at the table's edge. Her recent discoveries about the political calculations underlying her marriage had actually strengthened, rather than weakened, her resolve to contribute meaningfully to their partnership's success. If she was truly part of a larger strategy, then she needed to understand and participate in that strategy, rather than remain a protected observer. "What of the coastal settlements to our north?" she asked, studying the map with the same careful attention the men were giving to military considerations. "The Thornwood forces must realize that controlling our harbors would cut off all trade routes that could supply resistance efforts." Grettar looked up at his wife with appreciation that went beyond mere politeness. Her question demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had convinced him she would make an ideal partner for navigating complex challenges. "You're right. They cannot secure the Eastern Territories without controlling the sea approaches, which means they need our cooperation or our defeat," Magnus finished grimly. "There can be no middle ground with enemies who seek total control rather than negotiated settlement." The discussion continued through the morning as they evaluated various defensive options and their likelihood of success. Every strategy seemed to require resources they lacked or advantages they could not secure in the limited time available. The war horn beside the entrance seemed to grow more prominent in everyone's awareness, its silent presence a reminder that some situations could only be resolved through courage and steel rather than wisdom and diplomacy. As the council session ended, Grettar walked with Yrsa through the settlement's defensive perimeter, inspecting fortifications that had been maintained for appearance rather than functionality during the long years of relative peace. The wooden palisades showed their age, and the watchtowers needed repairs that would take weeks to complete properly. Their home faced existential threat, with defenses designed for deterrence rather than actual warfare. "Are you afraid?" Grettar asked as they stood beside the harbour, watching grey waves crash against wooden docks that might soon burn under enemy torches. Yrsa considered the question honestly before responding. Fear was natural when facing potential death or slavery, but terror could paralyze judgment when clear thinking was most essential. "I'm afraid of failing those who depend on us, afraid of watching our people suffer, because we couldn't find effective solutions to an impossible situation. But I'm not afraid of fighting for what we've built together." Her answer revealed the transformation that had occurred since discovering the hidden correspondence. Rather than feeling manipulated or diminished by the political calculations underlying their marriage, she had begun understanding herself as an active participant in something larger than personal happiness. Their partnership served purposes that extended beyond their individual desires, protecting communities, preserving ways of life, maintaining the delicate balance that allowed civilization to flourish in harsh northern lands. "Your father and I discussed many scenarios during our correspondence," Grettar admitted as they walked back toward the Great Hall. "But we never anticipated that our alliance would be tested so quickly or so severely. The plans we made assumed gradual political pressure rather than immediate military threat. Then we must adapt those plans to current realities rather than abandon them entirely," Yrsa replied, with the practical wisdom that had first attracted his attention. "What resources do we have that our enemies might not expect us to use effectively?" The question prompted Grettar to consider their situation from new perspectives. Traditional military thinking focused on comparing forces and fortifications, but asymmetric warfare. The kind that had made him legendary during his younger years required different approaches that leveraged unexpected advantages against superior conventional strength. "Your sisters," he said suddenly, his strategic mind beginning to see possibilities that pure military planning had missed. Astrid's beauty could influence key supporters in the enemy camp. Sigrid's commercial connections extend throughout the region, providing intelligence networks that formal military sources cannot access. Yrsa nodded slowly, appreciating both the insight and the implied recognition that their family's greatest assets were people rather than weapons. "And my practical knowledge of how settlements function could help us identify vulnerabilities in their supply lines and communication systems." As they approached the hall's entrance, the war horn seemed to acknowledge their developing strategy with silent approval. Perhaps the coming conflict would indeed require its summons to battle, but victory might depend more on unconventional tactics than traditional warrior courage. The horn had witnessed many campaigns across the generations, some won through strength, others through wisdom, but the most enduring victories had always combined both approaches in proportions that matched specific challenges. "We should call another council session," Grettar decided as they reached the threshold. "One that includes your sisters and other community members whose insights might reveal options that purely military thinking has overlooked." Yrsa touched the silver marriage bracelet that encircled her wrist, drawing strength from its protective runes as she prepared to help plan for the greatest test their partnership would face. The bracelet had been forged to symbolize their union's strength against external pressures, now that symbolism would be tested by the most extreme pressures their world could generate. The war horn waited in its place of honor, ready to sound the call that would summon defenders to their ultimate trial. But before that bronze voice could speak its ancient language of courage and sacrifice, human voices would need to craft the strategy that might allow their people to survive what was coming, with their dignity and independence intact. The shield that Grettar strapped to his left arm bore dents and scars from countless battles, its painted raven now faded but still visible beneath layers of protective leather wrapping. As he prepared for what might be his final combat, the shield felt heavier than usual, not from physical weight, but from the knowledge that today's outcome would determine whether his people lived free or died defending their homes against overwhelming odds. The Thornwood forces had arrived at dawn, their war cries echoing across the frozen ground as hundreds of warriors poured from the tree line like wolves descending upon trapped prey. Their numbers exceeded Magnus's worst estimates, at least 300 fighters against the barely 60 defenders that Vestfjord could muster from traders, farmers, and household guards who had never expected to face professional raiders in pitched battle. Yrsa stood beside the great hall's entrance, coordinating the evacuation of children and elderly to the hidden caves that honeycombed the cliffs behind the settlement. Her silver marriage bracelet caught the morning light as she directed families toward safety, ensuring that even if the battle was lost, some would survive to carry forward their people's stories and traditions. "The southern approach is blocked," reported Astrid, her golden hair now braided back severely as she took on responsibilities that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. "Sigrid's positioned archers along the harbour walls, but they can only delay the main assault, not stop it." The strategy they had developed during 3 days of desperate planning was risky beyond conventional wisdom, using the settlement's women and older men as active participants rather than simply protecting them behind walls. Every person who could hold a weapon or perform essential tasks had been assigned roles that maximized their limited manpower while exploiting the terrain advantages that careful preparation could provide. Grettar's legendary reputation had brought them one crucial advantage. Several smaller clans had sent warriors to fight alongside the famous defender rather than submit to Thornwood domination. Not enough to match enemy numbers, but sufficient to make their resistance meaningful rather than merely symbolic. These reinforcements understood that today's battle would determine whether the northern territories remained free or fell under the control of ambitious raiders who would rule through fear rather than traditional law. The first clash came at the harbour, where Sigrid had indeed positioned their best archers behind improvised fortifications built from overturned boats and cargo containers. The Thornwood advance slowed as arrows found their marks, but seasoned warriors pressed forward despite casualties, using shields to protect themselves, while closing the distance that would allow them to engage in the close combat where their superior numbers would prove decisive. Magnus fought beside his own gates, his aged sword arm still strong enough to hold the narrow passage that provided their only hope of preventing complete encirclement. Beside him, household guards, who had expected to spend the day mending tools and feeding livestock, instead found themselves standing between their families and enemy warriors, whose reputation for brutality was well established throughout the Salmon region. Grettar moved through the battle like a force of nature, his massive frame and legendary skill creating spaces where defenders could regroup and reorganize their resistance. The scarred shield on his arm deflected axe blows that would have shattered lesser protection, while his sword carved paths through enemy ranks with the efficiency that had made him feared across the northern seas. But individual prowess, no matter how extraordinary, could not overcome such numerical disadvantages indefinitely. For every enemy warrior that fell, two more seemed to take his place, pressing forward with the confidence of men who knew they held overwhelming superiority in both numbers and equipment. Yrsa found herself at the battle's crucial moment, standing in the great hall's doorway with a kitchen knife in her hands as three Thornwood warriors broke through the outer defenses. Behind her waited the last group of children too young to flee to the caves, including Magnus's youngest grandchild, barely old enough to walk. The silver marriage bracelet on her wrist seemed to pulse with warmth as she faced the advancing enemies. All her life, she had been the practical daughter, the sensible one who managed households rather than leading heroic charges. But now, with everything she valued about to be destroyed, she discovered reserves of courage she had never known she possessed. "You'll have to go through me," she told the lead warrior, her voice steady despite the terror that threatened to freeze her in place. The kitchen knife was pathetically inadequate against his battle-tested weapons, but retreat would mean abandoning children to slavery or death choices that no decent person could accept, regardless of personal cost. The warrior hesitated for a moment, perhaps surprised by such determined resistance from someone he had expected to flee or surrender, without meaningful opposition. That hesitation gave Grettar time to reach the hall's entrance, his legendary fury now directed toward enemies who threatened not just his own life, but the woman who had become his anchor in a world of constant violence. The shield that had protected him through so many battles now defended more than just his own survival. It protected the future they had built together and the hope that their people might survive this darkest hour. The bronze-tipped spear that pierced the Thornwood leader's chest bore runic inscriptions carved by Magnus's grandfather, symbols of protection that seemed to fulfill their ancient purpose as the tide of battle suddenly shifted. What had appeared to be inevitable defeat transformed into impossible victory through a combination of desperate courage, strategic planning, and the kind of fortune that favors those who refuse to surrender even when facing overwhelming odds. Grettar's arrival at the Great Hall's entrance had indeed saved Yrsa from the three warriors who had broken through their outer defenses, but the real turning point came from an unexpected direction. As the Thornwood forces pressed their advantage throughout the settlement, confident that complete victory lay within their grasp, the carefully prepared signal fires that Sigrid had positioned along the coastal cliffs began blazing against the grey winter sky. Those fires served as beacons for the fleet of allied longships that had been waiting beyond the horizon, hidden by early morning mist and positioned according to plans that Magnus and Grettar had developed during their secret correspondence. The approaching vessels carried not just additional warriors, but supplies and siege equipment that would transform a desperate defensive stand into a coordinated counterattack. The psychological impact of seeing Allied reinforcements arrive by sea proved as devastating to enemy morale as the tactical advantages those fresh forces provided. Thornwood warriors, who had been pressing forward with the confidence of assured victory, suddenly found themselves caught between defending forces that refused to break and new attackers emerging from longships that cut through harbour. Waters like avenging spirits. Jarl Ragnar of the western fjords led the relief force, his weathered face grim with the kind of determination that comes from understanding that today's battle would determine the future of all northern settlements. Behind him came warriors from half a dozen clans who had recognized that Thornwood expansion threatened every community that valued independence over submission to aggressive overlords. The tide has turned. Magnus gasped as he leaned against the gatepost, his sword arm trembling from exhaustion, but his eyes bright with renewed hope. Around him, defenders who had been preparing for honorable deaths instead found themselves part of a coordinated assault that was systematically destroying the force that had seemed destined to overwhelm them. Yrsa lowered her kitchen knife as the immediate threat to the children passed, but she remained at her post until the last young ones had been safely evacuated to the caves. The silver marriage bracelet on her wrist had somehow survived the morning's violence without tarnish, its protective runes seeming to glow in the firelight from burning thornwood equipment scattered across the settlement's courtyard. The battle's climax came when Grettar faced the Thornwood leader in single combat beside the harbour. Their duel, watched by warriors from both sides who understood that individual prowess would determine more than just personal survival. The enemy Jarl was younger and less scarred, but Grettar fought with the desperate fury of a man defending everything that gave his life meaning. When Magnus's ancestral spear found its mark, driven through enemy armor by strength born of righteous anger, the Thornwood resistance collapsed as thoroughly as their leader's ambitions. Surviving raiders fled toward their ships, abandoning weapons and supplies in their haste to escape before Allied forces could complete the encirclement that would have left none alive to carry word of their defeat back to their home territories. As the immediate violence ended and defenders began assessing casualties and damage, a strange quiet settled over Vestfjord. The settlement had survived its greatest test, but the cost had been significant: buildings burned, people wounded, and the comfortable illusion of safety permanently shattered by the reality that their world remained dangerous despite years of relative peace. Yrsa found Grettar beside the harbour, cleaning enemy blood from his sword while staring out at the grey waters that had brought both threat and salvation. The legendary warrior, who had seemed invincible during the height of battle, now appeared exhausted by the emotional toll of nearly losing everything he had worked to build and protect. "It's over," she said simply, offering the kind of quiet comfort that had drawn his attention during their first meeting. No dramatic declarations of relief or elaborate celebrations, just recognition that they had survived together and could now begin rebuilding what the morning's violence had damaged. Grettar turned to face his wife, his scarred features showing the kind of profound gratitude that comes from understanding how close they had come to complete disaster. "Your courage, in the hall facing those warriors with nothing but a kitchen knife that will be remembered in songs alongside any deed I accomplished with proper weapons." The bronze spear tip that had ended their enemies. Threat caught afternoon sunlight as Magnus approached, its ancient runes seeming to pulse with satisfaction at having served their protective purpose once again. Victory had come not through individual heroism alone, but through the combined efforts of people who understood that some things were worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. Their marriage had been tested by secrets, external pressure, and finally existential threat, and had emerged stronger from each challenge, forged into something that could weather whatever storms the future might bring to their harsh northern world. The wooden marriage chest that had travelled from Magnus's hall to their new dwelling now sat in a place of honour beside the rebuilt hearth, its carved surface bearing fresh marks from the recent battle, but its contents intact: letters, precious items, and the accumulated memories that bind lives together across the years. 6 months had passed since the Thornwood defeat, and Vestfjord bore both scars and signs of renewal that spoke of a community determined to grow stronger rather than merely survive. Yrsa sat beside the chest in the early morning light, her hands resting on her growing belly, where new life stirred with the promise of continuing their bloodline into an uncertain but hopeful future. The child within her would be born into a world where threats remained real, but where people had proven their capacity to face those threats with courage and wisdom rather than fear and desperation. Grettar emerged from their rebuilt dwelling, his movements carrying the same quiet confidence that had first drawn her attention, but with an added contentment that came from understanding. He had found more than political alliance in their marriage. He had discovered genuine partnership with someone who shared his deepest values about honor, duty, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. "The new fortifications are nearly complete," he reported, gesturing toward the strengthened walls that now surrounded their settlement with defensive capabilities tested by actual warfare rather than mere theory. But more importantly, the agreements with allied clans create a network that makes future attacks like the Thornwood assault far less likely to succeed. The political landscape of the Northern Territories had indeed shifted dramatically following their victory. Word of how a smaller force had defeated a supposedly superior enemy through strategic planning and coordinated resistance had spread throughout the region, inspiring other settlements to form mutual defense pacts rather than submit to aggressive neighbors who sought expansion through conquest rather than negotiation. Magnus approached from the direction of the Great Hall, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of a leader whose long-term vision had proven wise despite short-term costs. The correspondence he had maintained with Grettar across the years had indeed served its purpose, creating alliances that strengthened both their communities while preserving the independence that made life worth defending. "The harvest reports are better than expected," he announced, settling beside them with the comfortable familiarity of family rather than the formal distance of political allies. "Trade routes disrupted by the fighting have reopened, and several new partnerships have emerged from clans who want to associate with proven defenders rather than potential aggressors." The conversation that followed touched on practical matters of governance and resource management, but underneath those discussions lay deeper themes of legacy and continuity. The child that Yrsa carried would inherit not just property and position, but the responsibility to continue building the kind of society that balanced individual strength with community cooperation. Astrid joined them as the morning progressed, her beauty now complemented by the quiet confidence that comes from having faced genuine crisis and discovered inner resources that peacetime had never revealed. Her role in evacuating civilians during the battle had earned respect that went far beyond physical attractiveness, opening new possibilities for her future that extended beyond traditional marriage expectations. The messenger from the eastern settlements brought interesting news. She reported with the kind of thoughtful analysis that had always been present but was now more widely recognized and valued. Eric's remaining territories are seeking alliance rather than conquest. They understand that cooperation offers better security than expansion achieved through warfare. Sigrid appeared next, her sharp mind already working on the commercial implications of shifting political relationships throughout their region. The battle had demonstrated that her intelligence networks and trade connections provided strategic advantages that complemented military strength rather than competing with it. "Several coastal settlements want to discuss exclusive trading arrangements," she announced with barely contained excitement. "They recognize that our alliance proved more reliable than Thornwood promises, and they want partnerships with people who honor agreements rather than break them when convenient." As the family gathered around the marriage chest that had witnessed so many changes across recent months, Yrsa felt the weight of transformation that had occurred since that first evening when Grettar made his unexpected choice. What had begun as political calculation and personal recognition had evolved into something deeper, a partnership that had survived secrets, external pressure, existential threats, and the daily challenges of building a life together in their demanding world. The silver marriage bracelet on her wrist caught morning sunlight, its protective runes no longer symbols of hope, but proven talismans that had indeed provided the strength needed to weather the storms that tested their union. The bracelet would be passed down to future generations as evidence that marriages built on mutual respect and shared values could endure whatever challenges fate might bring. "What do you think our child will face that we cannot imagine?" Yrsa asked, as she felt the baby move within her. Responding to the warmth of sunlight and the sound of familiar voices, planning for futures that would extend beyond their own lifespans. Grettar placed his scarred hand gently on her belly, his touch conveying both protection and wonder at the miracle of new life emerging from their partnership. "Whatever comes, our child will face it with the strength we built together, knowing that true power lies not in individual prowess, but in the ability to recognize worth in others and build alliances based on respect rather than fear." The wooden marriage chest sat silently among them, its carved surfaces bearing witness to the truth that the most enduring victories were not won through warfare alone, but through the patient work of building relationships strong enough to survive whatever storms the future might bring to their harsh but beautiful northern world. Their story had begun with an unexpected choice that challenged conventional wisdom about value and recognition. It had evolved through trials that tested both their individual character and their partnership's resilience. And it continued now with new hope, growing literally within Yrsa's womb. Hope that the next generation would inherit not just their lands and possessions, but their hard-won wisdom about what truly matters when building a life worth defending.